A sharp rise in energy bills, a crippling household income squeeze. The Bank of England has announced the largest raise in interest rates in 27 years. Warning that the UK will fall into recession this year. The main reason for inflation, the sharp rise in energy costs driven by the war in Ukraine. Was this the right call? Officials say that even though this recent hike may worsen the cost of living crisis, it is needed to temper higher peaks of inflation in the future. Hello and welcome. My name is Hem Korsara and you're watching The Full Context. Today we take you through the recent interest rate hike, how the energy crisis is slowing down the UK economy and how it affects common households. Let's begin.
GDP growth in the UK has slowed and the economy is now forecast to enter recession later this year.
Operations in the Second World War. We must ensure that Ukraine wins.
Well, what the Bank of England have said today is, of course, extremely worrying. But it is not inevitable. We can change the outcome and we can make it more likely that the economy grows.
We in the Conservative Party need to get real and fast, because the lights on the economy are flashing red and the root cause is inflation. Now, I'm worried that Liz Truss's plans will make the situation worse.
Now, the Bank of England has issued a somber warning for the country as the war in Ukraine drives up energy prices worldwide. Britain too has not been spared, of course. Here's what the Bank of England announced on Thursday. First, inflation is now expected to hit over 13%. Consequently, interest rates have now been raised 0.5 percentage points to 1.75%. This is the highest the interest rate has been raised in 27 years. The bank also warned that the cost of energy will also rise. The average annual energy bill is expected to hit around $4,000. That's about 3,500 in British pounds. The British economy is also forecast to shrink in the last 3 months of this year and keep shrinking until the end of 2023. Now, for more on this, we're being joined by WION correspondent Alex Izzat from London. Thank you so much for joining us, Alex. A pretty gloomy forecast by the Bank of England, and the worst hit, of course, will be the people. What's the mood on ground, and can you take us through some of the ways that they'll be impacted due to the interest rate hikes?
Absolutely, it's gloomy, as you just said. People are worried and they're concerned. They've been seeing the cost of living rising throughout the past year. And in fact, it's been the worst for most people since the 80s. And the cost of living is going to continue to go higher and higher. We're going to be seeing rises in heating bills. Going to be working from home is going to be more expensive than it has been in the past few years. Cost of childcare. So families will be really going to be struggled because of this rate increase. And also wages aren't going up. And since 1960s, when records began, with the cost of living and the household income, it just means that we're not going to be able to get on that right step going forward and help us get ourselves out of this recession that is looking to come ahead. Now, the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey has blamed that action in Russia. He said that it is the fault of the Ukraine war, and he's denied that he's been slow to take action. He claimed that he didn't want to choke any chance of recovery from the pandemic. However, a lot of people are saying that he has been slow, and we need to have done all of these interest rate rises over the past few years and not to be blaming the pandemic that we've been seeing. People will see that their mortgages, if they've been on a fixed rate mortgage, they'll see a huge, potentially thousands of pounds extra coming out of their bank account. And it could really be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Right. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining us with the latest on that. We're also being joined by Douglas McWilliams, founder and Deputy Chairman of Centre for Economics and Business Research. Thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast. Now, in your opinion, is a recession inevitable?
I've been warning about this for 6 months, and so I'm not entirely surprised that the Bank of England has caught up with reality, but they've been very slow in catching up. I think also, people are paying slightly too much attention to what the Bank of England is forecasting. I mean, if their past forecasts had been decent, we would have had these interest rate rises a long time ago. And because they've been so slow to understand what's going on, it means that their current reaction looks a bit hyperbolic.
All right. So how big do you think is the contribution of the Ukraine war to the rising prices? Energy prices are, of course, an obvious concern. What are the other factors driving inflation, in your opinion?
Well, we've had inflation rising, and it's been rising all through last year before we even got into the Ukraine war. I'd say the Ukraine war has added about 5 percentage points to inflation, but a lot of the other sources behind inflation have been the shortages that have been worldwide, which have pushed up the worldwide prices of commodities. They put up the worldwide price of energy. Even before the Ukraine war, they put up the price of fuel, they put up the price of food, and put up the price of most things that needed to be shipped around the world.
All right. Now, we know that things already were not much better for the lower income households in the country. People are struggling to pay energy bills, telephone bills. How badly do you think an average household in the UK is going to be hit further if a recession does come along?
Our calculation, which hasn't actually changed very much in the last few months, is that from peak to trough, living standards are going to fall by between 5 and 7%. But that is an average. Actually, some sectors are being protected. The finance sector, wages went up 19% in the past 12 months. So they can cover the increased cost of living. And also, of course, the increased cost of living for the richer households is less. The people I'm really worried about are the people in poorer households whose wages are not going up very much. Their benefits are indexed to last year's inflation, at least under the current plans, and they're facing a huge rise in the cost of living, potentially 13% of the Bank of England's right. That is going to be a big hole in the living standards of the people who are least able to look after themselves.
All right. So what would you say are the immediate policies required to navigate this crisis?
We'll have a new Prime Minister in a few weeks, and I think he or she, presumably she, will be looking very closely at what is possible on the tax side, particularly to cushion some of the blows that are coming in from the international situation and from the rate of inflation that's being driven by a whole series of different things in the economy. I think we will see some action on energy prices. We'll see some compensation, particularly for the lowest income households. There might be quite a lot more too. It's a bit early to speculate, but the front runner in the Conservative leadership election does seem to be pretty open-minded about quite a big fiscal package to help people.
All right. Well, also, I'm just going to ask some clarity here. You said presumably she. So we know that the Rishi Sunak's and Liz Truss's economic policies are in stark contrast. So whose policies, in your opinion, are more sustainable?
I think that they're getting closer as the debate goes on, and I think they're converging essentially on Liz Truss's views, which is that there is a need to provide a lot more support for hard-pressed families, and Rishi Sunak seems to be changing his mind and coming much closer to Liz Truss's view on this.
All right. Well, Mr. McWilliams, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast.
Thank you so much.
Now, the economy has been one of the central points of debate between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, the two contenders in race for number 10 Downing Street. On Thursday, the rivals who set out competing plans to deal with the economic recession forecast clashed in their latest TV debate. Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak attacked Truss's unfunded tax cuts, saying it would further fuel inflation. Sunak, who has trailed Truss in recent polls, has repeatedly said that he would prioritise lowering inflation before cutting taxes.
That projects tens and tens of billions of pounds of goodies. But it all starts with not making the situation worse. Because if we just put fuel on the fire of this inflation spiral, all of us, all of you, are going to just end up with higher mortgage rates, savings and pensions that are eaten away, and misery for millions. I don't want that to happen, and that's why I am so focused on gripping inflation first.
Now, Truss, on the other hand, maintained that a recession was not inevitable if bold actions are taken. Truss has pledged a package of tax cuts worth £30 billion soon after she enters office.
If we do that, you simply can't tax. Under the current proposals, our corporation tax would go up to the same level as France and 10 points ahead of Ireland. And I really worry about our capacity to attract that investment into our economy if we do that. Okay. You simply can't tax your way to growth. And I'm afraid the very high taxes we have at the moment, a 70-year high, are likely to lead to a recession.
Okay.
And that's what the Bank of England is predicting.
Joining us now is Lord Meghnad Desai, economist and Professor Emeritus, LSE. Thank you so much for joining us on The Full Context. Now, the reality is that till the time a new resident in number 10 is announced, there is going to be uncertainty. Boris Johnson has said the government won't make any major economic announcements till his replacement takes charge. But by your assessment, if there were a fully functioning government in place, what steps would you say are required at this juncture?
Well, you know, we have two candidates debating the economy, as you were just reporting. And I think that, in a sense, neither is quite right, but Liz Truss is more wrong than Rishi Sunak. Now, neither candidate has realized that the stagflation is going to be much more serious than anybody expects. There's not only going to be a recession, but there's going to be a long recession. We have been through this in the 1970s, and this is just more or less a repeat. We had a quadrupling of oil price then. We have a rise in energy price again. And we have a war going on in Ukraine. We had a war going on in the Middle East at that time. And I think at that time in the 70s, it took 10 years before Mrs. Thatcher came to power. And then she really squeezed the economy really bare before the tax cuts. Now, they all remember tax cuts. They don't remember the pain that Mrs. Thatcher had to impose on the economy to get inflation out. To some extent, Rishi Sunak is right that inflation is a problem, but what he still hankers after is a tax cut. And I think the Tories are going to lose their obsession about tax cuts. There is not going to be any tax cuts till the economy is right, and it won't be right for a while.
All right, so I was in fact going to just come to that. One candidate is proposing tax cuts, like you mentioned, the other is not. Whose economic plan do you personally agree with, or at this point, given what we know so far, find more sustainable?
Well, you know, I think Rishi Sunak, by saying he will cut tax cut in the future, is on slightly better ground than Liz Truss. But Rishi Sunak is not a politician. He is a technical, you know, finance economic specialist. So he doesn't inspire the kind of empathy that Liz Truss does. So Liz Truss actually reassures people. Now, I think it's a false reassurance, but she reassures people, she talks to them, and she looks much more friendly. Rishi Sunak looks like a teacher lecturing people about he knows best. Now, I think, as I said before, neither know best, because what they have to say is that the economy is in much greater trouble than anybody thought possible. And they are not taking the economy seriously enough. But there we are. It's a Conservative party. They are in power, and the Prime Minister would be one of the two. And we will have a real crash in the economy.
All right. Well, that being said, Rishi Sunak did announce some measures when he was the Chancellor, but those are yet to kick in. Do you think they'll bring about some measure of relief for the people?
Not from what they're saying right now.
Okay.
No. I think the best thing that one can say about Rishi would not add a loose fiscal policy to a tight monetary policy. So at least his fiscal policy would be tight. And that will slow down the rise of inflation a little bit. But inflation is going to rise. The forces are already there in the economy, and there is no way Rishi Sunak or anybody else can change that.
All right. Well, Mr. Lord Desai, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast. Thank you for your analysis. Now, of course, it's not only the consumers who are suffering. Businesses big and small will be impacted if a recession hits. And WION correspondent Alex Izad spoke to Andrew Goodacre, CEO of Business Independent Retailers Association. For more insight on this, let's listen in.
As the Bank of England raises interest rates, Britain could be heading for recession. Andrew Goodacre joins me from the British Independent Retail Association. Andrew, what does this mean for the economy?
is massively worrying actually, because in business there's no cap on energy, so energy costs have already gone up 300-400% for some, and interest rates rising now in the way they are, plus other costs like the supply chain rises are still there as well. It's really difficult for retailers at the moment to make sense of it.
With rates increasing and no spending coming through, is there a risk that the high street will disappear?
It's a real distinct possibility actually, yeah, because if consumers feel this squeeze, and we're already seeing less expenditure, especially in some areas of retail, then the autumn forecasting is doom and gloom as well. So we know, I mean, just coming out of COVID, the one thing businesses wanted was a really good extended spell of buoyant trading. And this time last year, that's what we were looking at. But this sudden downturn in the economic conditions and the uncertainty it's causing, and without spending coming through, retailers struggle. Retailers only succeed if people spend money. So yes, there is a real risk that we could well see more businesses close on the high street.
Are there any positives from this rate hike?
Could benefit, because with interest rates going up in general, then savings rates go up. So if people have got savings and they're earning more interest on those savings, it may give them some leeway to spend money. But our overall concern is that it's actually not a positive. It's seen as a negative impact on people's cost of living and the way they feel about spending. Because most people will have borrowings, whether it's a mortgage, whether it's a business loan itself. So interest rates normally increases the cost of borrowing, and so it's yet another squeeze on expenditure, not necessarily release of it. So it's hard to see many positives from it if you are a independent retailer running a shop on the high street.
Now, talking about interest rate hikes, India too today announced a repo rate increase by 50 basis points. It's the third increase in the current cycle to cool high inflation. We're also now being joined by WION's business editor Sumit Chaturvedi for more insight. Sumit, what can you tell us about this?
Well, Haim, in line with the global banks which are rising interest rates to battle inflation, Indian Central Bank also raised interest rates today. We'll tell our viewers what does this mean. What does that mean? Well, today, third time in a row, the Bank of India, Central Bank of India, RBI hiked interest rates by 0.5%. It's 5.4% now. The repo rate we are talking about here, repo rate is the rate at which central bank gives money to other banks. So it's a way to fight inflation. How it works? Well, overall, it leads to less money supply to banks. In way they supply less money to consumers, and there's supply of less money to the economy, which means the money is less and the products or goods are sufficient, and that's what won't lead to high inflation. Inflation, remember, is the mismatch between high money supply and low products or less products. That's what leads to inflation. So objective of RBI here is to give less money in the hands of consumer, and that's what can lead to battle of the stopping of inflation to some extent, and that's what this step has been taken today. Overall, talking about economy as a whole in India, it's on not as bad situation as in other countries. Yes, the challenges remain of high crude prices, weakening rupee, also high inflation and recession fears. But as far as demand is concerned, in some quarters, demand is there. The coming festival season in India will be the real barometer to see whether demand is real or not. So as far as India is concerned, it's on a proper, we can say that a proper steps have been taken now to put economy back on growth path. Indian economy will grow at 7.2% this financial year, which is better than many emerging or the many large economies across the world. Back to you, Haim.
Well, thank you so much for that, Sumit. Also, just for some more clarity, can we expect more rate hikes going forward?
Absolutely, that's one thing, that one possibility which is there. Central banks across the world are going for continuous rate hikes to battle inflation. And Indian Reserve Bank, in fact, today also mentioned that accommodative stance is no more there. So they can go for further hawkish steps like raising interest rates to battle inflation. So yes, clearly there is chance for this to happen. More rate hikes can come as long as they don't lead to recession or they don't lead to sapid demand completely, because that's something which everybody is worried about. But yes, more rate hikes can happen. Back to you, Haim, for this.
Thank you so much, Sumit, for walking us through that. Well, energy bills have increased sharply this year. Household incomes have been stretched thin. The rise in gas prices has led to the deterioration in the outlook for UK and the rest of Europe. And inflation is expected to stay at, and I'm quoting here, elevated levels. We will continue to track how the UK navigates this crisis. For now, it's a wrap on this edition of The Full Context. Thank you for joining us. Global news and updates continue on the other side.